holler at me or whatever. About 2 weeks ago, at my home congregation, we had our VBS, and one of our subject for the VBS for this year was lessons from Joseph, and so we studied 4 different nights on the things of Joseph, and one of the nights I taught the adult Bible class there, and so my lesson for that evening was Joseph and the power of forgiveness. So if you want to be turning to Genesis chapter 46, we're going to get to that in a few moments. And so I'm going to bring part of that class. We won't obviously have time to get through all of it because our VBS time is a lot longer than what we're allotted this morning. How? Okay. So we're going to look at some of this here. I'm going to talk through some of it. We'll skip over some of it, but our main focus of this morning's Bible class is looking at the power of forgiveness. So from the Old Testament, looking at the lesson we can learn about forgiveness from Joseph, and then if we have time permitting, we will look at some New Testament examples we have on forgiveness as well. And one of the most common ones that we look at is the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. And so if we have time permitting, we will look over there. But talking about Joseph and the idea of the power of forgiveness that Joseph had, and what he did, or what was done to him, and then for him to turn around and have that mindset and that power of forgiveness is pretty remarkable. So in Genesis chapter 46 and 47 is where we see the power of forgiveness, but throughout the book of Genesis, we see the story of Joseph, and most of us know the story about Joseph. He was Jacob's, basically Jacob's favorite son. And his 10 older brothers knew that, and they were not happy about it. Which probably the same way that would be with most people today, right? If you had a sibling that was favored way more than another one, they would not be very happy about it. And we see there that from the story of Joseph that his brothers basically wanted to kill him, right? Some of them did, some of them didn't. And fortunately for Joseph, and we all know this was we can look back and know that this was all a plan and a plan from God, but Joseph was sold into slavery to the Ishmaelites. And then from there sold into slavery again from the Ishmaelites to Potiphar. And so Joseph was almost killed by his brothers, and his brothers told Jacob that he died, but not that they killed him, which they didn't. They sold him into slavery. Then he goes to Potiphar's house and becomes the head of Potiphar's house. So he goes from being a slave and sold into slavery and treated horribly by his brothers to a very high position. And he was great there. And then after Potiphar's wife tried to get him to lie with her, and he would not. And then, of course, as we know the story goes, that she turned that on him, and he was thrown into prison. Then from there, he had a horrible time in prison, and then because of the ability that he had to interpret dreams, and the dream that Pharaoh had, he then was brought out of prison. And then 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine. And from there, Pharaoh appointed Joseph, so he was in prison. Then he pulled him out of prison and appointed him to be over all the land of Egypt, because he knew that Joseph knew what was happening, right? So he knew the 7 years of plenty was going to happen, and he would make it prepared so they would be prepared for the 7 years of famine. And so he was appointed essentially the ruler over all of the land of Egypt. He gathered up for 7 years of everything he could so they would have it at time of the famine. And so then in chapters 45 leading into chapter 46 in Genesis, Jacob sends his sons, because the famine has started. They're about a year into the famine or so, and he sends his sons to get corn or grain, depending on your translation, from the land of Egypt. Now at the time, his brothers had no idea who this was, right? They did not know who Joseph was. Joseph disguised himself. He made himself not known unto them. He knew who they were, but they didn't know who he was. And they went into him once, and Jacob had sent everybody except for Benjamin. And because after he thought that Joseph was dead, then Benjamin was essentially his new favorite son. And so Jacob definitely had a problem with wanting to have a favorite son. But that's because of Rachel.
They go in the same way. And it was the second son out of it.
Yes, exactly. Great point. So it's because it was Rachel, and Rachel's who he wanted as his wife the whole entire time. And I didn't go into all that story because we could spend several class periods on that. So that's why I said I'm kind of skipping around some of it and skipping through some of it. But that's why he was his favorite son, and Benjamin was too. And he was afraid that something would happen to Benjamin, and then he would have lost Benjamin and Joseph. So so Joseph helps his brothers out, sends them back with the corn that they need, sends them back with the money that they even brought, everything. He doesn't take anything from them. But he asked that the younger brother come with them next time. And knowing who they were, knowing who his younger brother was, being his actual brother, he wanted to see him. And through that whole story, we see that Jacob didn't want that to happen, and then finally they were in such a dire need because of the famine, they had to. And so he sent them to them. Well, in the meantime, Joseph had kept another one of his brothers in prison, and so, that was the other reason Jacob didn't really, he's like, I've already lost 2 sons, I don't want to lose any more, but he did anyways. And so then that brings us into chapter 46, when they had all came unto, chapter 45, I'm sorry, I was off the chapter. Let's back up to chapter 45. In chapter 45 it says, in verse 1, then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them, and that's talking about his brothers, and he said, that stood by him, and he cried, because every man to go out from me, and where he stood, no man with him. And Joseph made himself known unto his brother, and wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled in his presence. So we see here that Joseph finally lets himself known unto his brothers, and they were scared. They were really scared. They were scared what he was going to do to them, because what was going to happen to them, because of what they had done to him. And in verse 4 it says, "And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath a famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years, in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance." So Joseph tells them, don't be afraid, don't worry. This was all God's plan. And this entire time, this is interesting to understand the story of Joseph, that throughout all of this, he always kept God first. And he had more trials and temptations and everything that we will probably ever have in our lifetime. He was basically almost killed by his brothers, sold into slavery, then he was, brought basically out of slavery over Potiphar's house, then tempted by Potiphar's wife, then thrown into prison, then, all these things kept going back and forth. He went from, we would say rags to riches to rags a lot. And, but throughout all that, he knew God had a plan. And he stuck with God's plan. We also know that he had the ability to interpret dreams and other things, so we know that he did understand what was going on. But regardless of that, he still always kept God first. So he told his brothers, he knew what was going on, right? Because of the interpretation of the dream, he knew there was 7 years of famine. So, like I said, the first time they went to him, just assuming from studying that there was about a year or so into the famine, and then they came back again, and that's what it says here in verse 6, that for 2 years hath the famine been in the land. So that's 2 years, and there's still 5 years more to come. They didn't know that. They didn't know that there was 5 more years to come, and he said, you have to trust in me, you have to be with me. This is all the plan, that God had, and it says in verse 7 that God had sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by great deliverance. And so all this whole plan, this whole time, that God had to help save their lives through the years of famine. And they were, like I said already, and it said they were scared once they found out this was Joseph. Because they knew what they had done to him, and they were afraid what he had, or he was going to do to them, but he did just the opposite. And this is where the power of forgiveness starts, right? It starts with him forgetting everything that had happened to him, everything that they had done to him, that they sold him into slavery, as it says in verse 5, and he knew that's why they were fearful of what he would do to them. But he basically wiped all that away, because he knew he was going to help them to preserve their lives. And it started before that, whenever he sent them back with the money that they had brought to buy the corn and all that. He sent them with everything they needed. So he was already taking care of them, and they didn't even realize who he was. And then going on further in chapter 45, Joseph, one of his main things is he wants to Jacob. And so he sends them to get Jacob, and provides them everything they need. In verses 21 and following, it says, "And the children of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for their way." So he gave them everything, provided for them, gave them money, gave them food, gave them wagons, gave them everything they needed to go on their journey. And he wanted to see Joseph. And in verse 26 it says, or verse 25, it says, "And they went up out of Egypt and came into the land of Canaan, and to Jacob their father. And they told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive, and he is the governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said unto them. And when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, and the spirit of Jacob their father revived. And Israel said, It is enough, Joseph my son is yet alive, and I will go and see him before I die." So, it would be hard to convince somebody who thought their child was dead that he was yet still alive. And not only was he alive, but he was in a very high position in Egypt and was providing everything for them. And he didn't want to believe it, especially coming from the sons that told him that he was dead. You said he was dead. He said he was killed by a beast, and they pretended, brought back his coat that was covered in blood, and they had a really good story. And then, but yet now they said he's not really dead, he's alive. Well, wait a minute. You guys said he was dead. Now you're saying he's alive? And so, it took Jacob some time to actually believe them and see, but he saw the proofs of what Joseph had done. He saw that everything that he had provided for them. He listened to their stories, and he was proven that he was still alive. And in verse 46 it says, "And Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came unto Beersheba, and offered sacrifices unto God his father, and unto God of his father Isaac. And God said unto Israel in the visions of night, and said, Jacob, and he said, Here am I, and he said, I am God, the God of the Father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will surely bring up again, and Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. And Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, and their little ones, and their wives, in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry them. So we see now that Jacob is going unto Joseph, and God has told him that fear not to go into Egypt. Don't fear going into this country. I'm going to take care of you and make you great nations, and we know all that which is to come after this. And then the rest of chapter 46 talks about his lineage and a bunch of names that I can't pronounce, so read that on your own and study that. You can see all those names there. But he had a lot of family, a lot of children. So, and then jumping down to 29 through the end of the chapter there. Chapter 46, it says, "And Joseph made ready his chariot and went to meet Israel his father to Goshen, and prepared himself to meet. And he fell on his neck and wept his neck a good while. And Israel said unto Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art alive. And Joseph said unto his brethren and unto his father's house, I will go up and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, My brethren and my father's house, which are in the land of Canaan, come unto me, and the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle, and they have brought their flocks and their herds, and all they have. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you and say, What is your occupation? That they will say, Thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth, even until now, both we and also our fathers, that we may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians." So we see here where Joseph starts making plans to take care of his brother. And this is all where we're talking about the power of forgiveness that Joseph has, that he has forgiven his brothers so much that he has already said he's going to provide everything for them. And this is where we see the actions start to take place, that he is going to provide jobs for them. He said, whenever you go to Pharaoh and he asks, what is your trade, what is your job, tell him you're a shepherd. And that's what they have always done. They have been shepherds. They will continue to be shepherds. They will take care of the flocks. They have their own herds and flocks that they will take care of, and others. And so he is providing not only food, but a living, a job, everything for his brothers. And it's just hard to believe at how much he had forgiven them after everything that he had done unto them. And then here in just a couple minutes, we're going to look at Luke chapter 15 and look at the parable of the prodigal son. And something interesting that I see from here that also relates to there is that in verse 29 it says, and he fell on his neck and wept his neck a good while. And when we look at the prodigal son, when he comes back from his riotous living, that the father and son interaction there is the same as what we see here, is that he fell on his neck and wept. And so that's just an interesting point. It's a little bit different, but to see the reaction of the father and son that we have there. Skipping down in chapter 47, I want to look at a couple last verses there in chapter 47. In verses 11 and 12 in Genesis chapter 47, it says, And Joseph placed his father and his brother and gave them possession in the land of Egypt, and in the best of the land, in the land of Rameses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph nourished his father and his brother and all his father's household with bread according to their families. So this is showing the fulfillment of what he said he was going to do, right? Joseph said, don't fear me, don't be worried, I'm here to provide for you. God has made this plan, and I'm here to provide. And so his forgiving them for what they had done unto him, not only did he forgive, but he is now providing everything for them. And I think what's even interesting, he didn't just provide enough for them to survive. Right? He could have just provided enough for them to survive, just for them to live. But looking in verse 11, it says, and he placed them in the best of the land. So, he gave them the best of the land. He didn't say, well, here's this a place, right? He didn't do that, you know, and he, as it says, was the governor over all of Egypt, so he had the power to do basically whatever he wanted, or put them wherever he wanted, but he gave them the best of the land. And I think part of that is that what we had already looked at and talked about is their jobs, right? So their jobs were to take care of the herd, the flocks. Well, they needed good land in order to do so. And so it's a good lesson for us to learn that, you know, when we forgive somebody, we shouldn't just forgive them a little, but we should forgive them beyond what we think, you know. Joseph not only forgave his brothers, but he also provided a great substantial life for them, of the best of everything, and not only for them, but for their families and for all those to come after them. So let's turn over to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15, and starting in verse 11 there, it says, "And a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said unto his father, Give me a portion of goods that falleth unto me. And he delivered unto them his living. And not many days after the younger had gathered together and took it as his journey into a far country, where there he wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a famine in the land, and he began to be in want, and he went and joined himself to a citizen of the country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would fain to fill his belly with the husk that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. And when he came to himself, he said, How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against thee, or against heaven, and before thee." So we'll stop right there for a second. We're going to look at all of this and the rest of this chapter, but we see a lot of comparisons here between Joseph's story and this story, right? Another famine. So we see that God likes to use famines as a way to teach, you know, lessons and to show hardships that people will have. And we see this multiple times throughout the Bible. But it says here there were 2 sons. Right now we're just looking at the one son, and here in a little bit we'll look at the other son and his reaction. But the younger son said, "Give me my portion of my inheritance. Let me have what I want. And, you know, I don't want to wait until you're gone to spend it. I want it now." You know, that sounds like a lot of attitudes of children today. I want my money and I want it now. You know. You're raising 2 daughters. You know what it feels like too.
You see a lot of people today that think they need it right now. They need it up front. They don't want to wait on it. They don't want to work for it. They just expect it.
Very true, right? So a lot of people feel like they're entitled for something without doing nothing. And that's the exact lesson we're seeing from here, right? So he wanted his money without doing anything for it. So who worked for that money? The father, not him. It was his inheritance. And we also see that a lot of people today will do the same thing with that money as what he did, right? So a lot of people today do the same thing. They just blow it. I mean, that's the simple way to put it. But we see where he, verse 13, it says he took his journey, and then it says, and there he wasted his substance with riotous living. Right? That's just partying. That's basically what that means. He wasted his substance. He wasted all the money that was given unto him on partying. He thought he had friends, right? Because he bought them. You know, how many times does that happen in today's society, that people, when they have a lot of money and they think that, you know, they're rich and they have all these things, that they have a lot of friends around them when they have all that money. But what happens when they don't have that money anymore?
You lost all their friends.
Well,
So-called.
huh?
So-called. You know, money controls things. Money makes it to where it's easy to have friends. It's easy to do this. Working doesn't necessarily always make the same result.
Well, why were they friends?
They wanted something for nothing.
That's right. It's exactly what you already said, right? That a lot of people want to have something for nothing, and so if they know they don't have to do nothing, but they're going to have something given to them, they're going to be close to somebody, right? For the time being.
Yeah. Why it's convenient.
Right. And so we can see many examples in the Bible where it talks about money and covetousness and how the money is the root of all evil and so on and so forth. And that, you know, understanding through this lesson that that's part of it, right? Is that money, and he saw quickly that it wasn't as good as what he thought it was, right? And so as we keep looking further down, once he had, you know, wasted all his money, wasted everything, he had nothing to provide, right? He couldn't even provide for himself. And there rose a great famine, and because of the famine, he had nothing. So he went and joined himself to feed swine. What is ironic about that lesson about the Jews and swine?
They want nothing to do with it.
Right. So to the Jews, it was a dirty animal, right? And he now is left with the task of feeding the swine, even so much as he wanted to eat what he was feeding the swine. And I know around here plenty of people have seen pigs and what they eat. No thank you. But that's how desperate and hungry he was, right? But where did he go from? He went from here where he had everything. Even before he left his father, he had everything, right? He had anything he wanted, anything he needed. You know, and it goes on further to say that, you know, that his father's servants had more than what he had at this point. So he recognized and realized that, what am I doing? What have I done to myself? Where have I put myself? What have I got myself into? And, you know, it's true that it says a lot of times today, you know, people have to hit rock bottom before they realize their problems. And that goes with those who are alcoholics or those who are in drugs or anything like that, is that they have to hit absolute rock bottom before they realize, not always, I'm saying there are times where people have to absolutely hit rock bottom before they realize that I have a problem, that I need to get out of the situation I'm in. And we see that that's pretty much what happened here, right? I don't think we're a Jew feeding swine and being in the muck and the mire and wanting to eat what they're feeding could have been any more rock bottom than what he hit. And so he finally came to his senses in verse 18 and said, I will go to my father's house and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee. So he realized that he needed to repent of his sins. So starting in verse 19, it says, and am no more worthy to be called thy son, and make me as one of thy hired servants. anytime that a child is lost in any way, right? Jacob thought that Joseph was dead and then he was back alive. In this case, you know, there's always that bond with a child that parent has with them, that they're always going to love them no matter what. But it's better whenever they actually see them, or they see their back to the way that they should have been instead of the way that they were. And so this is a great reaction that we see here, and this is part of the idea that we're going to talk about with the power of forgiveness, of what the forgiveness the Father has for the Son. And it says in verse 21, "And the Son said unto the Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the Father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe and put on him, and put ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fattened calf and kill it, and let us be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again, and he was lost and is found, and they began to be merry." So he didn't just say, "Okay, that's fine, you'll be one of my servants. You know, you came back, it's okay, so now you're just going to be one of my servants. I'm going to give you just enough of what you need," right? The same reaction we see here is the same reaction that Joseph did, right? He didn't just say, "Here, I'm just going to give you what you need to survive, and I'm going to give you the best of everything." And the same thing we see here is that he said, you know, you're not going to be one of my servants. You're going to be back just like you were. And here, I'm going to give you a robe. I'm going to give you, you know, a ring on his hands, shoes on his feet. I'm going to make you back just like you were, and bring the fatted calf and be merry, because he was happy that he was back again. And in verse 25 it says, "Now his elder son was in the field, and he came and drew nigh to the house, and he heard music and dancing, and he called one of his servants and asked what these things meant. And he said unto them, Thy brother is come, and the father has killed the fatted calf, and because he hath received him safe and sound, and he was angry, and he would not go in, therefore came his father out and entreated him. And he answering said to his father, Lo, these many years did I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, and yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I may make merry with my friends. But as soon as thy son, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, and hast killed for him the fatted calf, and he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead, and is alive again, and was lost, and is found." And so we see the lesson here, you know, from the other son. He had a lot of the same reaction a lot of us would probably have. He's like, you know, why does he deserve all this when I've been here the whole time? I've done everything exactly like you have. But, you know, his father said, this is the understanding. You already have it. You've always had it. You've always had it because you've always stayed with me. You've always believed. You've always obeyed. You've always been here. You've always had it. But we have to rejoice with this one because they were lost and are now found. And so, you know, the power of forgiveness is so great when it comes to the eyes of God, and how he is